Our speaker this morning is our own Reverend Diane Diachishin, and her topic is, it's very relevant, real community, messy, imperfect, and needed.
I think this mic is okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Wonderful to see so many people here. I swear I didn't coordinate this with flowers. The Gay Pride March is next, the first Saturday in June in New Paltz, and this is a welcoming stall. This is called Real Community, Messy, Imperfect, and Needed. And restorative justice is a practice or kind of a way of looking at the world drawn from indigenous cultures. And this talk will focus on the spirituality and all the promise and the good things of the restorative justice approach that they work towards. Healing broken relationships within the greater community, as well as within our own congregations. Restorative justice is not merely a conflict resolution tool, it's a set of principles and a way of looking at life. It's rooted in indigenous worldviews, embraces a life-affirming, non-sectarian spirituality, and it seeks justice as healing, relational, community-based, participatory, needs-based, and very forward-looking. I first heard about this when Reverend Jim Bridges was here. He was the minister that led us through this horrific fire and the rebuilding of this amazing sacred space. And he started a restorative circle group, and he called it compassionate communication, and now it's referred to as mindful communication. And after Jim left, I facilitated the same group with a social worker by the name of Vince Polina, who's no longer attends our ceremonies or our services. And we led this group for many, many years, not only here, but outside the community in Goshen and Beacon and Warwick at one time. And then when Reverend Antel was with us, and he came after Reverend Jim Bridges, he sent me to New York City to take some training at One Spirit Institute and helped us organize a few workshops in the process. My dear friend, the Reverend Leek Seligman, just came out with a new book called Being Restorative. And on the first pages, she ties in our UU principles with restoration. She writes, "The true self in everyone is good and wise and powerful, and our core self may not always be reflected in our behavior, but it still exists. The world is profoundly interconnected. What affects one affects all. We all live downstream. And all human beings have a desire to be in right relationship. We move in all the light that we have, and with insufficient light, we bump into each other. So we need to cast light. And we need practices to build habits of living from the core self that support wholeness. And I'll talk about a few of these. From the religious point of view, the Harvard Divinity School News Archive had a really great article, and they interviewed an Indian woman from the Director of Restorative Justice. And she said that this draws from many roots. At its best, it is birthed from and manifests the Bantu word, Ubuntu, which means a person is a person through other people, as well as the Buddhist concept of interdependence, or as Howard Sayre describes in his book Changing Lenses, a biblical reference that restorative justice is an act of love that seeks to make things right. Thus, many of us come to restorative justice through our faith communities, or through indigenous worldviews, or perhaps in an experience with our judicial system. Kids are having fun out there. Fania Davis, who's the director of restorative justice in Oakland, California, writes, as a Sioux elder has emphasized, it is not in the nature of light to overcome darkness, nor of any being to have dominion over others, but it is in the nature for us, for each of us to find our place in the universe, that place of balance. At deepest levels, this is what justice is, finding that place of balance. The historical origins of our scales of justice can go way back to Mott's scales and Kemetic, which are ancient Egyptian traditions. According to Howard Sayre, who's also a big pioneer, RJ, I'll call it restorative justice, if you don't mind, is also consistent with the Judeo-Christian notions of shalom. Being in right relationship between individuals, between groups of people, between people and the earth, and between people and the divine. Shalom declares an ultimate allegiance to respecting life in all its forms. It encourages us to see the nurturing of the sacred relational web as our ultimate calling. So I've talked just a bit about the religious origins, and restorative justice takes many forms. One process that's used is called the circle process, and that was inspired by Native Americans. And it has evolved to be currently used in schools, in communities, somewhat in our justice system. And the circle process is used in many ways. The goal is to deepen understanding, to model respectful dialogue on different topics, to help with conflict resolution within communities, within our justice system, within families, and within congregations. So why a circle? When you think of the medicine wheel, you think of that sacred symbol used by the indigenous Plains tribes to represent all knowledge of the universe. You think that the medicine wheel is a symbol of hope, a movement towards healing. As a botanist, Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote the book Braiding Sweetgrass, she wrote as also a member of the Potawatomi Tahami Nation, all 15 of us in my clan can find a comfortable seat around the perimeter of a fire circle. Even without a covering, it feels cozy. Few of us live in round houses anymore, where there are no walls or corners. Indigenous architecture tends to be small and round, following the model of nests and dens and eggs and wombs, as if there were some universal pattern for home. And a sphere has the highest ratio of volume to surface area, minimizing the materials needed for living space. Its form sheds water and distributes the weight of a snow load. It is efficient to heat and resistant to wind. Beyond material consideration, there is a cultural meaning to living within the teachings of a circle. So the roots, the philosophy, and the values of the indigenous model of restorative practices are used within families, within communities, and organizations. We had a wonderful Native American speaker here a few months ago by the name of Heather Bruegel. And she talked about the stolen children of her Native American community. And she talked about a time when tribal leaders reported that their children had gone missing. They were taken from the homes that they knew, and they were placed in non-Indigenous homes. The Circle Tribal Institute, or CTI, has been used and is used today for Native Americans whose children have been removed from their families. They try to use the circle process to repair relationships and include everyone as decision makers as they move forward. The Circle Tribal Institute provides alternatives to the federally mandated succession of court hearings, and they try to resolve some of these issues out of court with the families. Circle processes are quite simple in that the basic model is just to gather people together to have honest discussions about difficult issues and to seek resolutions. The goal is to achieve consensus about what should be done moving forward. For example, within these tribal families which were torn apart, because consensus is the basis of the final outcome, that outcome has full support of all involved. Facilitators of these circles, they're not neutral mediators, but instead they hold with equal compassion of those who have been impacted by the harm. Nor are they decision makers. The parties come together to create a plan to repair the harm which has been done. And it's facilitated by someone who cares deeply that each person, as Navajo peacemakers say, will move forward in a good way through and after the process. It's really inspiring to see Native American communities seeking to restore justice using their own practices, which have been used for such a long time, to try to resolve some of the injustices that they have faced for so many years. These circles include not only the Native American families whose children were taken away, but also the American families in which these children were placed. Now, locally, I first heard of the Restorative Justice Center from our beloved Vern Bell, who passed, and we all miss her and hold her in our hearts. She always urged me to go to Newburgh to attend some of the Newburgh restoration circles. The Newburgh Restorative Center has been hosting community circles in Newburgh since 2015, and they serve the community in many different ways. In 2015, they were started at the Fullerton Center on Grand Street, where a group of Newburgh residents and legal aid defense attorneys from New York City all joined to open the doors. And the Restorative Center has worked with high school students to develop a peer-based program for teens. They've worked with Mount St. Mary's College, and they've worked with the city manager in Newburgh, and they work with the police department, and they provide an alternative to the criminal court system. Mostly low-level offenses, but they strive to build a separate alternative to the criminal justice system. From Harvard Divinity News, they wrote, "Restorative justice advocates contrast the current judicial system of state-sanctioned vengeance with a different process that emphasizes repairing harm, inviting all affected to dialogue together to figure out how to do so, and giving equal attention to community safety, the needs of the persons harmed, and accountability and growth for those who have caused the harm." And from their website, they write, Our circles guide us into the deeper relationships where the goal is to foster strong and hopefully lasting connections. As we experience what the circles offer us, as we see and hear our oneness manifest in our neighbors, within the space we make together, we realign our priorities to move beyond humiliation, beyond embarrassment, and beyond punishment, so we can resolve conflict, we can generate healing, and agree upon restitution with understanding, affirmation, and appreciation, as well as providing an alternative to incarceration. They hold community circles on topics. They hold them at different churches. At Safe Harbors, they've held a few. And the themes that they have talked about have been access to clean drinking water, race relations, honoring the concept of motherhood, celebrating women as change agents, and the power of human connection in their neighborhoods. So in short, restorative justice invites us to be present to one another in ways that bring healing and wholeness rather than in ways that deepen harm and hostility. And importantly, it gives us some of the tools to do it. It creates safe space so we can honor the goodness in ourselves and honor the goodness in others. Susan Frederick Gray, who was our past UUA president, wrote, "Today, this moment calls us to be prophetic and to imagine a world without policing. Black and Indigenous people and other folks of color have already created alternatives to policing because these structures don't always keep them safe. We must follow the lead of these communities and imagine a world that centers around collective care and community involvement and restorative justice rather than surveillance or punishment or incarceration and policing." So when I read the right relations policy at our congregational meetings, I understand the idea of restorative processes and practices. They take time, and I get it. Not everyone's always in full support. And as I called the sermon, community, it's messy, it's imperfect, but it is necessary. And unfortunately, it really doesn't take much for conflict or misinformation and harm to spread quickly through a group and through a congregation. And the impact of these can quickly escalate and become complex. We're still learning about the restorative process, and no one can be forced to use it. And these processes are not about shaming and blaming. They're really about coming together to listen, to share, and stay in relationship while finding a way to address harm and impact. To some, it is a way of life or a way to look at the world and your relationship, our relationships in our family, to our community, within our work, and our friendships in our congregation. And we have used it in our congregation. We've used it in many ways for attempting conflict resolution and for topic discussions. Reverend Chris facilitated a few circles with the Newburgh community when our Black Lives Matter sign was defaced. And Markley and I facilitated a topic circle a few weeks ago on Gaza. And currently, our Soul Matters groups, they also use the circle process, where we have a topic that we discuss each month. And some of those topics have been mystery and justice and equity and interdependence. So I'm going to close with a poem written by Joy Harjo, a Native American poet. Her book is called Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings. When we made it back home, back over those curved roads that wind through the city of peace, we stopped at the doorway of dusk as it opened to our homelands. And we gave thanks for the story, for all parts of the story, because it was by the light of those challenges that we knew ourselves. And then we asked for forgiveness, and then we laid down our burdens next to each other. We asked for forgiveness, and then we laid down our burdens next to each other. And as Jay says, thank you for your kind attention and for listening. And if anybody would like to